Okay. I'm now going to talk to Mrs. Jorma Heier from the university in Germany, Osnabrück. Would you mind introducing yourself briefly?
Yeah, what can I say? As you have mentioned, I'm working at the University of Osnabrück right now, and I'm in the field of political theory. And I'm trying to wrap up my PhD thesis, which is kind of informed on the ethics of care, but it kind of deals more with one element of the famous Toronto definition of what care is that is usually under-recognized, and it's the element of repair. So I'm trying to figure out what it could mean to have a political theory of repair, and that is what my thesis is focused on. And a part of that, I'm a lecturer at the university, and I teach political theory, introductory and master courses.
Okay, thank you. And the title of this conference is Rendering Care the Meaning of Politics. What does that mean to say?
It's a very complicated and a very good question. Thank you. So it kind of, I think it all started about 8 years ago. Elizabeth Conradi had organized for Joan Toronto to have a guest professorship visit at my university, which back then was the University of Göttingen. And I had the good fortune to sit in one of her classes that focused on care and world politics. So that was the very first moment that I heard someone try to connect thinking about the ethics of care to political issues and to really make care the center of political practice. And for me, when I heard that, it all kind of clicked into place. Even things that I didn't know needed clicking, they kind of clicked into place. So this question has been with me for a long time now. What would it actually look like if our political thinking and our political practices centered around care, insofar as that we would acknowledge that each and everyone is dependent on each and everyone else, and all of us are vulnerable and fragile beings, and how can our politics and policies reflect it and be careful so that we all, as the famous phrase goes, can live in the world as well as possible. So that was a question that has been interesting me ever since. And Hannah Arendt has famously suggested that we should understand the meaning of politics as freedom. And Hannah Arendt, I know for some care ethicists, it's a very ambivalent relationship, but some of us also relate to her work. Or, of course, it's a difficult question in feminism whether you can work with Arendt if you're a feminist, but I wanted to see if we take up her question and kind of rephrase it in the language of care. So what would the meaning of politics be or look like if we made world politics the center of a care? So, and luckily for me, the panelists that we invited, they all have been working on the question for quite a long time as well. So the political aspects of care, which in Germany at least are very under-recognized, so it's not the kind of work that we do there usually.
And the book that Joan Toronto wrote, The Care and Democracy, how does that relate to what your own interest in repair?
Yeah, I mean, this book took a long time coming, and I was very happy when it was finally out, and she was so kind as to give me a heads up and let me read earlier versions of it. And the notion of responsibility is very important, and responsibility setting processes in the Caring Democracy book, which I think for me is very important in repair, because Toronto's notion of privileged irresponsibility, I think, is tied to an epistemology. Oh my gosh, the English word is hard to pronounce, epistemology. So it's epistemic questions for me. How can we perceive that we are not being attentive to the same persons again and again, and that their needs cannot be voiced and they are rendered invisible? So her concept of privileged irresponsibility and how to tackle that with changing responsibility setting processes and making them more inclusive, and like really having everyone at the table, is something that I think is very important in trying to think about political repair, because I mean, for the longest part of history, only a very small elitist group of people were allowed to participate in political affairs, and the last 200, 250 years have seen a lot of social movements first, white non-possessing male persons down, female white persons down, people of color movements, and now the disabled people's movement and post-colonial movements to be included into that responsibility setting processes and to scandalizing the neo-colonial way of us meeting our basic needs through exploiting people in other parts of the planet. So the concept of responsibility kind of really, it covers a lot of very hard to tackle and difficult issues. So that book of Chandra is very helpful for me in that way. Yeah.
Your dissertation also goes into the issue of repair. Could you explain a bit more what you mean to say by that?
So, I mean, it's very hard to put in concrete terms because I think for most part of human history, the injustices and the harm doing and the genocides that have been perpetrated by one group of people to other groups of people is just so enormous that it's hard to find a starting point for where we should start to think about repair. But what I, especially coming from the German background with a very specific history of genocide, find interesting is that how can we find political ways to address that there's always the same type of people that get ignored in the way that we form our politics, and that they usually don't have their needs included into our understanding of what political issues should be and how to focus on that. And in very concrete questions that we have, if you think of contexts like Rwanda, for example, or South Africa, if for a very long period of time one group of people has exploited and enslaved and harmed another group of people, or so how can we live together in one common shared political entity, and how can we have our political procedures and political institutions reflect an honest intention to repair what has been done? Because I think in a way, since at least the merit of care ethics is that we think everything from this point of relationships. So these relationships, to use a phrase by Margaret Owen-Walker, they are not morally habitable. You cannot really live in a society, in a shared political entity, if you have a previous history of collective wrongdoing amongst yourselves. So how can we make sure that the moral standards that we have, that are supposed to protect, I mean, this is always what we tell each other, that the political and moral standards that we have, they are supposed to include everyone and protect everyone from harm doing, but in fact, a lot of people are, by group belonging, singled out, not to be protected in the same way by the standards. So how can we go back to that and remedy that we voluntarily or by conscious decision frame our standards so that some are excluded, and then how can we build our political institutions so that we can hear the voices of those who have been formerly shunned out? And I think this is an even more complex question when, I mean, in cases like Rwanda or South Africa, usually beneficiaries, victims and perpetrators are still alive, so it's a very pressing issue and it's very difficult to tackle because there's so much harm doing and wrong feelings going on. But I find it also interesting, like for the German case or the newly emerging discussion about reparations for slavery in the United States, that you can see that even collectively political wrongs that go back quite far in the past will have influences on the present, a very severe influence in the present. So how can we make visible that these harm doings that seem to be partially in the past have a very important influence on the political present and, quote, Sheldon Wolin, the possible futures that we are going to have as political community. And I think unless we find a way to deal with these questions, we cannot act politically, because the harm doing of the past will always be in the way of us really democratically acting together or acting together in concert. So how can we redress these harm doings that has been started in the past, but that has these immense and tremendous influence on our political acting in the present?
Thank you.